You're tuned in to Strength Culture's Quantum Lifting Podcast, brought to you by the team from Melbourne Strength Culture, the home of Australian strength training. Here are your hosts, Charlie Athanasiou and Jamie Smith.
There it is.
Welcome. Ooh, it's the intro. Welcome. I tried the little
The pop-up technique.
pop-up technique. Let us know what you like in the comments. Second episode of the new season.
Season
we had
2.
Really good response to the first one, so we're very happy.
We doubled our views.
Just from
Our
the
listens.
from the filming.
From the filming. We had some feedback though. Number one, the microphones were covering our face too often, so we're going to try and rectify
The
that
microphone is lower now.
today. The microphones are slightly lower. We're talking over the microphones. Number two, the lighting was too warm. So we've gone the cool option on our soft boxes. The way in which we can identify that is by using the white.
I'm gonna take my jumper off.
Is by using the white on the sign behind us. And then also we had the that I look disheveled, so I got a haircut and shaved my face.
I still look disheveled.
But that's all right.
I'm going the beard, but I've been grooming it, combing it, and beard oil, cedar wood, King of Wood, Shaver Shop, Milkman, great beard oil.
That's our first sponsor.
First sponsor.
Beard oil, cedarwood beard oil.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about, not a little bit, a lot about, it's going to be predominantly what the whole show's about, programming. Just basic sort of programming ideas and philosophies that we've built here at Melbourne Strength Culture that we base a lot of our programming principles off. And also some common mistakes that young coaches might make unknowingly, and that can be rectified quite easily. So obviously we've got to give credit to three big main players in the strength and powerlifting scene that have influenced heavily how we do things here at Melbourne Strength Culture. One is Eric Helms. If you don't know who Eric Helms is, go read his content, watch his YouTube videos, listen to him on podcasts. He's got the training pyramids, the nutrition pyramids. Has put together very complex topics into very basic ways to consume.
He's very good at making complex things easy.
Very simple for us mortals. Juggernaut, JTS, Chad Wesley Smith, and Max Aida. And
I don't think Max Aida was around when they were doing these things, but
he is now, though.
he is now.
He's around now, so
people's coach.
We'll give him credit.
Well, that's actually Mark Bell, but here's a sticker.
And is that Quinn Hennock with?
Nah, Quinn Hennock runs a clinical athlete out of
Did he
Newport,
lead
California. He was never in Juggernaut. He was just like
kicking it with him.
I would say that he was just like a consult that they used a lot.
And the third is Mike Teixeira.
Mike Teixeira.
Who if you want to learn more about powerlifting, programming, ideas, philosophies, go the RTS classroom.
Yeah, we did 2 of those.
And also just any content that you find through his stuff.
He's very dry.
He's very dry. You need to get a bit more personality when you present your ideas, but has good ideas and has a great brain where he questions things and breaks them down and tries things, and then he shares his experiences. And
He's just been around for so long that
I think listening to Mike Teixeira really made me realize that no one knows anything. Where he talks about as an analogy with programming, especially when you start to get athletes that are a bit more on the higher end that have been lifting for a long time, and you're really trying to milk those little 5 kilo PRs and stuff from a whole big cycle. He's like, you're in a cave. You don't know where the exit is. All the rocks are moving around constantly and floating, and you got a pen light, and that's the only way you can see. And that's literally what programming is like for some of these guys. That was his analogy.
Why are the rocks moving?
Because you can't go off feel. Because you only got a little pen light.
Yeah, but what do you mean the rocks are moving in the cave?
Like, to get out, they're just constantly moving, shifting gears. So it's like a maze.
I don't know about that.
So all you can use is your little pen light. If you go off feel, the rocks have moved by the time you get back to them. So it's a new variables at play.
Yeah, but why are the rocks moving?
Because I don't know, that was his analogy. Don't shoot the messenger.
I think the messenger might have fucked that one up.
Anyway, you know what I mean.
I don't, but yeah, fair enough.
Variables
Can change.
constantly changing.
The rocks
In a
don't.
complex human system, and what once may have worked for someone might not work again. The
Yeah.
variables are the rocks. The
Yeah.
pen light is our small scope of what we actually can see on the surface, and we're trying to get to the door, which is the peak.
That's it.
That's the analogy.
That will be the running analogy of today's episode.
Yes. So we'll start with just some common principles that we've gotten off these people to begin with. And Eric Helms' training pyramid, I highly recommend if you haven't gotten your hands on it.
It's still the first place I send pretty much anyone that asks.
If you want to learn programming, go to that. You can also watch his videos on YouTube. But the number one rule, and this probably governs the number one, the bottom of the pyramid, the most important part is adherence. And that governs probably a lot of the decision making here. I have a lot of guys who will ask me if they can do something. And as long as it abides by what we're trying to achieve, I'm happy to put it in. Because if you ask for a movement and it's something you enjoy, and it aligns with what we're trying to achieve, and you're probably going to train that movement with more intent, more enjoyment, and actually get more out of it. So adherence is massive.
Without a doubt.
Like, if you're not... The best program can be written, but if the person doesn't adhere to it, well then what's...
It almost sounds cliche, but it's amazing how many people still fuck that up. They spend hours upon hours. And we talk about this in our internship, that the hard skills, so your actual programming and all that sort of stuff, probably comes second fiddle to the soft skills of getting people, the psychology of just getting people to do things that they don't want to do, or just to be adherent to a program or consistent to a program, or whatever hurdles they might be facing. But those soft skills are quite often a little bit more influential than the actual hard skill of what the program has. So if you can just get somebody, it doesn't matter. Oh, I want to do incline barbell press. Well, fucking oath, let's do that. Let's replace one of your highly specific bench press variations to an incline barbell press, because we're still going to get great results out of that. In terms of dynamic correspondence, which I don't know if this was on our list, but it wasn't. But we can talk about dynamic correspondence, which is sort of like how you would define specificity, and how you would actually gauge whether or not something is more specific to something else. So it's like a marker of specificity. They have three sort of specificity scaling ideas. I'm sort of lost for a word. Subcategories, I would say. Yeah. So we have psychological specificity, how specific that stimulus is from a psychological standpoint. So what you're feeling through your head, your emotion, and all that sort of stuff. We have biomechanical specificity, so how close it is to the actual task of competition, being squat, bench, and deadlift. Very easy to understand for powerlifting. And then you have physiological specificity, so how specific it is to metabolic demands, energy systems, and all that sort of stuff. The physiology of what's actually occurring.
Running 10 kilometers 2 weeks out from powerlifting meet
is pretty non-specific.
Doing a set of 3 at an RP9, relatively specific of a competition squat.
Doing two reps, more specific. So as long as we're ticking off a couple of those boxes of specificity, which for strength training is pretty darn easy, it doesn't really matter. Like, you can still get strong, you can still build muscle, you can still perform and progress through your training. So adherence and that soft skill sort of stuff is key that most people fuck up. We were fucking up for ages. I'd almost say 18 months here at Strength Culture. We're writing good programs. Why are these people not getting better? Why are these people not hanging around? And all of a sudden we're like, all right, we need to be better. We need more email updates. We need more subjective communication. We need more subjective monitoring.
Now, like, most of my clients would write half their program for me. And that's not like... I think too many coaches think they've got to be the one that takes charge of everything. But at the end of the day, if you're not adhering to the first rule, which is adherence. So taking into consideration their likes, preferences, what they felt responded well, athlete intuition, which is something me and Bryce have spoken about quite often, because I often go to Bryce with what I believe is working well or has worked well, and he's going to run with that and I do that with my guys now too, because athlete intuitions, if someone feels something's going to work well for them, it probably is going to work well for them, because a lot of it is in the mind, the psychological aspect of it. So taking into consideration that, so getting feedback off your athletes, what they felt worked well, what they liked doing, and using all that information to write the best program for them. Not for anyone else, for them. I think that's covered adherence.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is still the biggest thing that people fuck up.
So
ourselves included. Get people doing the actual program.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Next on
Insightful.
Eric Helms' tier is volume, intensity, and frequency, which are all pretty basic.
It's basically understood, but I think where these three come into communication with each other is through periodization and how you're actually manipulating those three variables against each other to make sure that we're progressing to a specific goal. So specificity, I would almost put in there with the key variables. I know that Juggernaut talk about that as probably their biggest thing, I think, is the top of their list.
It's specificity and overload.
Yeah, specificity and overload. But yeah, those sort of volume, intensity, frequency, specificity, overload are all sort of wrapped up in the same, and you can't really talk about them as independent variables. They're sort of dependent on each other. They're codependent.
They all interrelate to some degree. So we track volume here at Strength Culture with sets per week, like hard working,
prescribed above RPE 6.
Yeah, hard prescribed sets per week. You can obviously track sets times reps times weight, but
stupid.
Volume load doesn't really equate when you think about it. Like 1 by 10 at 100 kilos and 10 by 1 at 100 kilos, not quite the same stimulus.
As soon as you change an exercise, so if you go from flat dumbbell press to incline dumbbell press for the next block, your volume from block 1 to block 2 is and now is arbitrary. It doesn't matter. So you're better off gauging your work.
You're doing 5 hard dumbbell sets a week, whether that's shoulder press, incline press, dumbbell press.
Doesn't matter.
So then when you change the movement, because you shouldn't leave the flat dumbbell press forever. It's going to get a bit stale, and you're probably going to become sort of resistant to adaptation if you just do the same movement over and over again. So typically I go a couple blocks with a variation, then I change it. So, but then obviously when you start a new movement, the absolute load's going to be lower, which means technically our volume, if we're tracking in sets times reps times weight, will be down, but it's not really. We're still doing 5 hard working sets. Stress on the body is quite similar, stress on the joints, all that stuff. So
you can almost say that it would be higher stress because it's a novel stimulus.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there's a lot. So hard sets per week. It was a game changer for us when we started doing it. Our spreadsheet does track hard sets per week for us as coaches, so we can manage that across training blocks and training periods, 3, 4, 5, 6 month periods, back-to-back blocks, training phases. So hard sets per week is definitely a key that I think a lot of younger coaches
probably miss, because in the textbooks it's sets times reps times weight, but again applied probably not the best. And sets per week is very easy to track. We're doing 15 sets of bench per week. It's very easy to go, we're going to increase volume, decrease volume. I'll take 3 sets out, we'll add 3 sets in. Like, it's very, very easy to sort of track.
It's also I mean, getting a little bit off topic here, but during injury processes, coming back from injuries and understanding sort of where your landmarks are for your thresholds of volume, sets per week is definitely far easier to gauge and to educate your clients on rather than tonnage. Yeah, we're heavily
Well, and then obviously interrelated with that, intensity, we've got absolute intensity and relative intensity. Absolute intensity being obviously bar load, so 180 kilo squat single is heavier than 170 kilo triple at an RPE 10, but relative intensity, the 170 was a harder set than the 180 single at an RPE 7.5, whatever, let's say. And then obviously, intensity is just weight on the bar. Frequency is obviously how frequently are you doing the movements, and where I feel that frequency has the best effect is especially for beginners, like motor patterning. Definitely, the more frequent we can expose a lifter to a movement, the better they're going to ingrain those patterns. So giving a new person bench once a week and they're not touching it for 7 days again, if they're this powerlifting, obviously, not going to be ideal to improved motor patterning and skill acquisition.
I think, and something that was a key thing for me, don't think about frequency so much as just its own variable. And we talk about how these are all dependent on each other, and any manipulation of one is a manipulation of all of them. But Frequency, I think the easiest way to view it is just how you're organizing your volume across the week. It's literally that simple. So volume, I would almost put volume and intensity at a higher, more important status than frequency. And frequency is just the organization of your volume. So if you've got somebody who is doing, let's say, 15 bench press sets per week off 2 days in the week, maybe a better organize. So an eight and a 7, 8 sets on one day and the 7 sets on the other day. A better organization of that may actually just be across 3 days. We have 4 to 6 sets per session. We get a more consistent stimulus across the week. We don't have those 2 big spikes of volume, causing a whole lot of intra-session fatigue, which can diminish some of your movement quality and all that sort of stuff. So there, and then comes into Charlie's point. So think about frequency as more so, well, I like to think about frequency more so of how you are actually organizing your volume throughout the training week. And at any point in time, you might need to decrease or increase frequency to change the way somebody is actually progressing through their block. I know this is something that I know Mike Teixeira talks about a lot. And it's sort of misunderstood understanding that we need to consistently just push volume, and that volume is the key driver of all of this. Think about sort of where the research is showing right now that progressed volume, if you want more hypertrophy, we need to be doing more. If you want more strength, we need to be doing more. And as a result of that, we just get increases in volume and sets and sets and sets and sets per week. I don't know, Mike Teixeira is sort of like that devil's advocate, which is what he pretty much is the best at in our space, saying, well, hang on, I've had multiple guys get stronger by reducing their volume, and not just reducing it for a peak, but reducing it from volume blocks and development cycles and all that sort of stuff. And I've definitely experienced the same thing. We're going through it with Jason Stupas right now. He's just come off a massive training block, two big training blocks. In terms of volume, the most volume he's ever done, but for him to get stronger, we can't just keep increasing volume from there. Like it's a
be training for 4 hours, recovery will be impeded, and it's not conducive. So, and also manipulating volume to allow for further long-term progression from phase to phase to phase. So you can't, if you're always adding volume, let's say we've doing 20 sets per bench, 20 sets on bench, and we've been doing that for quite some time. Instead of going to 25, maybe dropping to 15 or 14, doing that for a couple of blocks, then coming back to 20, and you'll be a bit more sensitive to that higher volume in sets per week, rather than just always adding more and more and more. Because if we always just go up, we're just going to end up.
It's not linear. The same way you can't make linear strength gains, you can't make just linear volume gains. You can't make linear anything gains. You need to go through phases of up and down.
We'll touch on, so progression is obviously the next one. This one gets a little bit like, we shouldn't be, and I spoke about this on Weekly Weights, we shouldn't be chasing progression for the sake of chasing progression. Progression is a byproduct of training adaptations, not what drives adaptation itself. So obviously when we look at training, there needs to be an element of progression when we look at the macro scale, but too often people get caught up in a microcycle mind and just go, I didn't progress from last week, I'm not getting stronger. Strength doesn't work like that. It doesn't work on a week-to-week basis. It's over time, and there's going to be little fluctuations where strength's up and down, up and down, up and down, but the general gist of getting stronger, if you look back at a 3-month, 6-month, a year block, macro cycle, it's going to be on the linear trend upwards.
If it's not, you're fucking something up.
Yeah, well then, that's when there's an issue. But progression week to week to week, session to session to session, not always going to be ideal, not always going to happen. But the common mistake, that progression is what drives adaptation. Progression is a byproduct. Progressive overload is a byproduct of adaptation. So
I think we could probably dive into that idea of having this mindset, and this is probably one of the key things that we see with young coaches, and not just young coaches, young athletes, new people in the sport. Do I have to turn that tape across? All 19 minutes. I might go and do it. But that idea that we should be seeing week to week progress, even through a training block. I know that this is probably the biggest qualm that we have with percentage based training, is that you should just be able to take 5% jumps on your percentages every week. Like, really? If the first 3 weeks of the training block are so sub max from 60 to 70%, like, yeah, all right, we can take 5% jumps, but why do we wait 3 weeks before we get to some sort of stimulus that is actually going to create progress?
And then if you add all those 3-week periods up over a year, if you're doing 6-week blocks, so let's say we do 8 blocks across the year, where, you know, there could be potentially anywhere from 15 to 25 weeks where we're training sub-maximally, not driving the appropriate stimulus. So,
and this is the biggest.
How about just take a step back from the fact that training needs to progress every week and just do the work, the hard work at the prescribed intensities or prescribed RPEs, and let your strength just do the job. It will go up. It will go up. There will be little fluctuations down. That'll happen. I've experienced that a lot lately with my bench, where it's quite up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. But on the general trend, when I really look at it and break it down, every block I'm hitting PRs on my bench at the end of the block. So take a step back and look at the macro scale.
And I think another step down into this rabbit hole, and this is something that we learned from Mike Teixeira, being the bottom-up approach to periodization. So the more traditional view of periodization. So periodization, if you're unaware, is just sort of how you manipulate your training variables towards an end goal. So it started from like Olympic-based sports who did 4 years worth of periodization. Generally, it starts with a period of off-season. So you'd go through an off-season of very non-specific dynamic correspondence, really, really low. I remember hearing stories about like Russian weightlifters who would go and do like skiing and swimming for like 3-4 months. Like that was structured in their program. 3 months of swimming and skiing so that you are then refreshed to go and train for the next Olympic series. But periodization sort of stems from that, where we have these periods where we are structuring our training in a certain way to get a desired outcome. And that's sort of where periodization falls in. It's how we organize all of our training variables towards an end goal. And the traditional view is that we start with our endpoint in mind and we work backwards from there. So for a powerlifter, we have a comp. Let's use Team Champs. A good example would be Team Champs right now. We're 3 months out, I think. I don't even know.
12.
I think it's 13 weeks or 12 weeks.
12, yeah.
Doesn't really matter. In the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. So you work back from there. You're like, all right, well, I need to have my deload, my taper week. So I've got 11 weeks to deal with. So then I've got 11 weeks and I can structure that with a 4-week strength phase, a deload, and then a 6-week more of a volume-based load, more of a volume-based block. And you sort of work backwards from there. And that is a traditional way in which periodization would unfold. And then we always thought, well, maybe that's not the best way until we sat in with a Mike Teixeira classroom and he talked about the bottoms up approach and this idea of emerging strategies, sort of taking control of your training. And that is just being responsive or adaptive to what is actually occurring in a week-to-week basis and making your decisions as they come, rather than looking forward and trying to predict what the future will hold for us with our training and with our progression, and being a little bit more responsive to the week-to-week progression of what's occurring, how the athlete's feeling, whether or not we're making progress with the current prescription, whether or not we're making fantastic gains, and we could probably do more of this sort of stuff to make further gains. And that is now where we reside from our programming standpoint almost completely. Obviously, we always have our end goal in date and our end time in date, but we look to build one perfect microcycle, being a training week, build that thing, let it run for a week, make any adjustments that we need to make, let that run for another week, make any adjustments that we need to make. And we just keep adding and adding and adding and adding to that thing.
Layers.
You just add layers, and you're using the context from the current training week to build into the next week. And we do really think it's a far better way. And that's where percentage-based training, with this idea that your initial weeks need to be so sub-max, RPE 3s, 4s, and 5s, so that you got somewhere to build into the block. It's like, well, to us, that's just time wasted. Like that's a training week and a week of stimulus that we could have at the required intensity to drive some sort of disruption to homeostasis and actually build some form of progress. Adaptation, yeah. So there's sort of two ways that you can look at it. Like the textbook will pretty much only tell you top-down approach. Like you set your goal in date and you work backwards from there. I mean, that's how I used to program when I did a lot more field-based sports stuff. I think that comes in a little bit more than powerlifting. Powerlifting at the end of the day is just strength training, where we've only got one variable to play around with, or one adaptation that we want. It's a little bit harder from like a field-based sport athlete to go a bottoms-up approach. But for powerlifting, it just makes sense to structure it that way.
It does make a lot of sense. And that's the more I've delved into this and thought about it, especially with RPE, and it makes more sense that, at the end of the day, we need a stimulus. And you just spend too long without that stimulus if you're just chasing progression, which progression is a byproduct of the stimulus. So it's like, I think you're looking at chasing the wrong
Rabbit.
basket of fruit.
You're chasing the wrong rock in the cave, yeah?
Yeah.
That one's moving around, and
They're all moving.
You got your little pen light shooting at it.
They're all moving.
They're all moving
But,
constantly.
We'll move on to... So I think we'll touch on our juggernaut principles just quickly, which a couple of these we've already gone over, with specificity, overload. One thing I wanted to touch on, so specificity and overload we've touched on heavily already. So I think you can put these two together. Fatigue management and individual difference. The biggest thing with individual difference is recovery. So that's where you're probably going to have to spend the most time working out how much someone can handle and making sure we're getting the appropriate stimulus, but allowing for the appropriate time to recover, to come back with that super compensation so that we're ready for the next session, whatever it may be. So if we're squatting twice a week and we're squatting on Monday and Thursday, knowing that we've got that 2 full days off is enough for that individual to squat again come Thursday. And this is where I found it more with deadlifts. Some guys just deadlift once a week. Jason Stupas, for example, once a week. Probably could handle 2, but he's progressed with 1, so why give him 2? Like, save 2 for...
At some point, we'll need it.
Table's terrible. So save 2 for a later point when you need to pull that ace out of the back pocket. So the individual difference would be recovery, which is fatigue management.
Well, I think as a whole, that's the biggest thing you're playing with every single person. Like, we can go back into our major key variables being volume, intensity, frequency, specificity, and all that sort of stuff. And all of that is geared off individual difference of recovery. So that's where majority of your manipulations in training is coming from. How well is your athlete recovering? Can we give them more without them blowing up?
If we give them too much, we're not going to get the result we want, which is to get stronger. We're going to have a non-functional, overreaching sort of response where we fucked them. They're not actually stronger because we've destroyed it.
We've destroyed them.
And too little will obviously mean
no progress.
Not getting stronger. So we've got to find that sort of healthy medium, but always knowing that we don't always have to give them the most that they can recover from. You can actually still progress and be on a little less, which is something to definitely keep in mind. Variation we've touched on, obviously the start, which I would put into everything we spoke about, adherence, but variation also to reduce staleness and just to allow for long-term progress. So
monotony.
Always training comp bench can get very boring, very monotonous. Plus, you can also tweak the psychological aspect of a lifter by, as we said, moving it to an incline bench. They're probably going to experience more progress because it's a newer lift, it's fresh, the stimulus is quite sensitive. But then also when we come back to comp bench, they're going to be excited and hopefully want to train comp bench again. And then you're probably going to progress longer because you're a bit more sensitive to the comp bench stimulus now. And there'll be quite a bit of carryover from incline bench. Like, they're still so very closely specific to each other that it's still carrying over. So variation can be used to allow for long-term progress and also reduce staleness and monotony to keep the lifter adhering to the program, as we discussed earlier on in the podcast. And then I think that's pretty much it. Phase potentiation, that's still up. I think
it's low on my list.
Everything we've learnt. I would just use phase potentiation as like
an understanding that training should be getting more specific.
But not even that. You can, like what we spoke about with volume, just going on a lower amount of volume, so that when we come back to the higher amount of volume, we're a bit more sensitive to that stimulus. So you're potentiating the phases. Like what Bryce has sort of done with me with this block. So we did the 2 comp deadlift days. I responded really well. This block, he wanted to just do 1 comp deadlift day, the pause deadlift day, so that
And then
come back to 2 comp deadlift days, because he's like, if we milk it dry now, we might not get that response in the comp block. Who no one knows if it's going to work. Does Bryce know if it's going to work? Hell no. I'm not going to hold him liable. I feel like it will work.
It will work.
I feel like
If you believe it, Charles,
it's going to work.
You'll achieve it.
But it is going to work.
You pulled 290 yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
How was?
I just got a bit shaky through the middle because I didn't pull my tension out properly. I was a bit, to be honest, I was a bit complacent. I wasn't even expecting to come pull 290, and I was sort of just, and then everyone was looking at me, and I don't like.
Mate, you trained last night in almost the busiest the gym's ever been. We had 17 people in here.
It was too busy. I actually left with like anxiety.
Yeah, it was fucked.
I had to drive home in silence in the car. Just in fucking silence.
Charlie overwhelmed.
I was done. DUN. And I find it sometimes I don't like doing that stuff when there's non-powerlifters present, because I don't like getting revved up in front of non-powerlifters.
Fair enough.
I don't know. It just
That's fair
Friday sessions, yeah, it's just all of us, and we're like
just the fellas.
But there was a few people in the gym last night. I was like, I don't really want to start fucking screaming and shit in front of them.
Grunting at the bar.
Grunting at the bar,
The
headbutting the
mongrel.
bar. But anyway, I did it. I pulled it, and I got to look at the positives. PB 5 kilo PR, pulled it pretty underwhelmed, not really like hyped up at all. Pulled it after hitting a squat PR the day before, and probably the
What'd you
heaviest,
squat?
240, and 5 by
RPE?
4, probably an 8.
240.
Yeah, I reckon my squat's hard to gauge the RPE because I really don't know unless I AMRAP it. I want to AMRAP 240.
Well, you pin squatted
220
for fours.
So then I did 5 by 4,
There's a bit going on now.
197.5 for my back offs, which was tough, but that's the heaviest I've ever done for that kind of volume. So I'm getting strong. So Hazy, I'm coming for you at Team Champs. Shout out.
Hayes.
I'm putting the pressure on. Hazy doesn't reckon I'm a chance, so
To what?
to beat his client Craig.
Oh, to beat Craig.
He totaled 755 at nationals. It's a big ask, but
Nah, I'm backing you in.
you know what? You gotta believe. You gotta
Believe it and then achieve it, mate. It happens twice. Once in your mind,
So
and then in reality.
yeah, we had the busiest session ever at the gym. But I think that let's leave. I'm gonna, because we're running a little bit short on time. We've got a couple other things to get through here on the show, and we're gonna go to. That's pretty much our main principles. We're probably gonna run.
We'll run multiple podcasts
that dive deeper into some of these topics, because there is a lot more to speak about, and we can get
Some
into
nuance.
the nitty gritties of it all. So we're going to go to 3 common mistakes that young coaches, new coaches, and if young, there's old coaches, not really old, but most people are.
Like a training age and biological age, like a coaching age.
3 common mistakes. The first one is changing too many variables.
Too often.
So something I used to get caught in this like rabbit hole, changing shit all the time, changing from sets of 6 to 5 to 4s in the same block. I just leave 5s. Just leave 5s.
Let it play.
Let the 5s play out. At the end of the day, you're just looking for training volume. You're just looking for a stimulus. I think too often coaches are chafing the idea of progression over the stimulus, which is everything we spoke about before, and then they get caught up in, we've got to change the reps so that we give the illusion of progression, because we obviously know that as volume come down or reps come down, intensity will go up. But are you actually getting stronger, or are you just giving the illusion of that stimulus? So just let the block play out. Just stick with 5s and just run that.
And just let it run.
Let it run.
Let it run.
And also changing the movements too often. So you got to find that balance. Yes, we've spoken about all that jazz before, but you don't want to also get caught up where you're changing too often.
Because you never, and there's something that Pat Davidson made a good quote on, that if you, so our constant example today will be flat bench and incline press. If you go flat bench for 4 weeks, then go incline press for 4 weeks, back to flat bench for 4 weeks, by the time you're in the 4th week and you're actually, you've got the movement down pat, and you're actually in a position where you can start to make some progressive increases in the actual intensity in which you're training at, you flip it again, and then you got to go and get used to flat bench again. Like, you need to go through the learning phase of every exercise before it can actually get to a point where you're actually disrupting enough homeostasis to cause the adaptation to occur. If you're constantly changing, you're just constantly going through motor control weeks where, yeah, it feels hard, but it's only hard because you don't know what the fuck you're doing.
There is a heavy component of skill acquisition with a new variable, new movement that
Particularly compound lifts.
you don't know how to express your strength, so you got to get the skill down packed, and that can take a couple of weeks, and then so you don't want to be changing too often either. So finding that balance, 6 to 8 weeks probably.
Yeah, it's on the smaller side. Maybe for isolation exercises.
6 to 10.
Maybe isolation exercises could probably, like a bicep curl doesn't take fucking 5 weeks to work out how to do. But I mean, if you haven't done incline barbell press for a while, go and do it. You feel like your arms are about 48 inches longer than what they actually are.
Range is crazy.
The range of motion is crazy. The touch point is completely different to your
One of my
normal bench
favorite
press.
is a mid grip or close grip incline bench. Crazy range of motion.
Crazy ROM.
Great for hypertrophies.
Yeah, so maybe like from just a general prescription, maybe compound lifts you probably want in there longer than 8 to 10 weeks.
I just want to reiterate, I said hypertrophies as a piss take. I wasn't actually being serious.
And then your isolation lifts, you could probably cycle through a little bit quicker because the learning phase, the skill development phase is a lot less for isolation lifts.
So that's number one. Number two would be, and we've harped on this all day, the need to progress week to week, weight every week. Remember, stimulus is what drives adaptation, not progression. Progression will happen with correct programming and just letting the program do its thing. We can't force adaptation. We can only facilitate it. Christ. Got that one off Bryce, who was passed that down by Mike Teixeira. So can't force it, only facilitator. We're adaptation facilitators. That's our title. We're not coaches. And number three is programming too many exercises
per session.
You see some guys that come into, look at this program and this, and I used to do this early on too, and
there's 50 slots.
Didier used to do it too, and we had heaps interns. Yeah, there's 14 exercises on one day. Like, when you get to a point with your training where you really can only train maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 tops. Like, I struggle to get through 3. Like, I've got tomorrow, Friday, I've got 4 movements. I've got pin squats, wide grip bench, flat incline dumbbell press, and Bulgarians, and I'm fucked. I'm cool. Like last week, I didn't even do my Bulgarians. I moved them to Saturday because I was done.
Once you've built an appreciable amount of output with any skill, it is taxing. Like,
it is taxing.
3 or 4 hard sets is fucking hard.
And this was something I couldn't. Mike Teixeira's 12 model. He has like 12 movements a week, 4 days, 12 movements, 3 movements a day. I couldn't understand. I was like, this just doesn't seem like enough. And Bryce used to program me very much like that, maybe 4 on some of the days. When we'd go into more like non-specific blocks, maybe 5. But now I realize, like, when you are training damn hard and you're pushing shit and you're hitting the proper RPEs, 3 on any day is enough, and it still takes you 2.5 hours. So don't get caught up. Maybe early on with beginners, you can still program 6, 7, maybe. I don't know, for more skill acquisitional.
5 max.
5.
Main lift, a couple accessories, and then just some fluff at the end.
But yeah, don't get caught up in programming 12 movements. And using supersets can obviously reduce time and all that jazz. Agonist, antagonist pairs, push-pull, all that stuff we've heard of. That's all classic, very basic. But that's it for the programming aspect. So we're going to run...
not quite. We've got 2 questions, but you want to play your guitar first.
We're doing
a new segment.
I said to Jamie that I wanted to play guitar on the podcast. So now we're doing the video. I'm learning guitar. I'm 4 weeks in. So Jamie's like, why don't we just do progression every week? Which is one of the 5 pillars of living a fulfilled and inspired life. So I'm going to show you guys 30 seconds quickly. This will be more for the viewers watching it at home, Potsy on your TV. I'm going to show you guitar.
If you do watch, can you please tag us in a story or something? I thoroughly enjoyed watching people have us on their big screen TV talking shit. Here we go.
The guitar's out.
The Eric Choco. Eric Clapton.
This is all I've been doing. This is how basic my training has been for guitar. And it's interesting because I am learning all the stuff we've been learning about training and neuroplasticity and patterning and frequency and neurons that fire together and wire together and the brain that changes itself. The brain, I was listening in Atomic Habits. Musicians have a bigger, I think it was cerebellum, I don't know if it was one of the parts, but taxi drivers have a bigger hippocampus. So your brain literally, and then they also did studies that when the taxi drivers retired, the hippocampus got smaller. So parts of your brain, depending on tasks that you will atrophy and hypertrophy.
That's actually crazy.
It's interesting, but I've actually got that word. But anyway, this is my practice. So we're learning riptide. I've got an A minor chord. I've got a G chord and a C chord. And I'm literally just learning how to transition into the chords. That's all I do. I sit there for an hour and I do that.
Crazy.
Repetition.
And what happened to your right elbow?
I've got some elbow
tendinopathy.
Yeah, that's what I've been practicing. And then we got the down, up, down strumming pattern. Yeah, that's guitar for this week. We'll come back in 2 weeks.
We'll come back and we'll see how that's going.
Anyway, that's going to be the new segment.
Charlie did actually develop some tendinopathy in the right elbow from the strumming. And he went and saw Dan.
If it's from the strumming.
It's from strumming. It's unilateral. It's the only new stimulus, man. It's definitely from the strumming.
It's from doing heavy ass squats, PBs every week.
And Dan said to manage his guitar volume.
So that's why my practice is literally changing the chords. Same as, and I'm telling you, the whole sleeping on it, I wake up in the morning and I'm better at it.
Got it, yeah, 100%.
So I think I'm more fascinated with the motor learning of this because obviously for lifting, we've been doing it for such a long time that it's so innate. It's just our subconscious mind takes. It's like driving a car. Like I remember the first time you hopped in driving a car. You know, now you can fucking phone coffee, talking to someone. So now you can obviously you got 12 different things yelling at the person in the back. You're looking indicating change lane. It's just happening. So you've almost forgotten what it was like to drive brand new. So for me being so bad at something, but seeing those progressions is like crazy. And hopefully by Christmas time, we'll be playing you guys a song on the show. So
I think you will be.
I reckon I will be too. I've been practicing hard. So we're going to do that right before the Q&A each week. And now we'll go into the Q&A. We've got the two
I reckon
questions.
we do it at the start, man. You just enter strumming. We want some strumming from the start.
Strumming.
That's it.
Elbow tendinopathy.
And then we have our Q&A.
Which we're going to go into now.
Which will be quick. So we had 2 questions come through. I actually lost all the questions somehow. I don't know how, but Josh Hannell, our number 1 listener, he said, what is the difference between programming for powerlifting and programming for athletic development in general? And
I think the simple answer to this is goal driven. So the goals are completely separate. The goal of an athlete is not to get them strong in the gym to get them strong. It's to get them stronger so they obviously injury prevention, improve their biomotor qualities for their sport compared to powerlifters where their goal is literally to improve their 1RM. So
the 1RM, yeah.
Chasing strength for athletes just for the sake of chasing strength at some point isn't beneficial to them improving their sport or getting any better. So,
but the key is the principles are exactly the same. There is no difference at all. You still need to manage volume, frequency, intensity, specificity, that idea of dynamic correspondence, getting closer to the skills that which we need to express in competition periods. I think the biggest difference between the two would be that with field-based athletes, you're managing a whole bunch of variables at once. There's this idea of cross-training or cross-interference, which is that certain stimulus or certain training might actually blunten the response and the adaptation of different sort of biomotor qualities. And some of them work really well together. Building strength and power together work really well. But doing like lactate training and then trying to build speed on top of that, probably not going to work too well together. So having that idea of how to best manage multiple outcomes at once is your biggest thing. And for strength training, we discussed periodization today. Periodization, like it has such a little influence on what the hell is going on in the grand scheme of things, because all we're doing is training for strength. You could almost put hypertrophy in there as well, but strength and hypertrophy, they ride together. Whereas with a field-based sport, your periodization has a big influence on how well you're actually going to get the adaptations and the outcomes of those biomotor qualities, being strength, speed, power, endurance, balance and skill, or whatever the fifth one is there. But that is your biggest difference between the two things. Powerlifting at the end of the day it's very easy. There's one thing that we're chasing. We are chasing strength. Speak to anybody that has done both S&C for field-based sports and then has swung across to powerlifting, similar to my own story. S&C is a whole different kettle of fish, and powerlifting is under the umbrella of strength and conditioning. So I've got a lot of respect for pure strength and conditioning coaches. I think that's something why I respect Jamie here. So not myself, Jamie Buziotis, because he has a very, very good grasp on how to sort of drive strength and conditioning adaptation across multiple outcomes and multiple goals. So that would be the biggest difference, that powerlifting is really quite basic. It really is. There's not a whole lot going on with powerlifting.
Simple.
It's just a basic addition and subtraction, and then when you've got S&C variables, it's like throwing in multiplication and division in there as well. It just adds another layer because there's so many other things that we've got to compete with, and then also you've got to compete with your field-based coach or your tactical coach, who's quite often a mom.
Can sometimes be a dog.
And the last one?
Last question.
Would be someone asked, how am I programming Will Crozier? Obviously, we have Crozier as one of our athletes, an interim athlete for the next, probably got about another 7 weeks with him, which is cool. It's been a good opportunity. It's been a cool opportunity to practice some of our strategies on obviously somebody who is very elite, very progressed, and very good at what he does, which has been cool because it's shown us, again, powerlifting isn't that difficult. You just play around with a couple basic variables and things generally go in the direction they want you to, or you want them to, if you have your individual recovery strategies individualized to the person. So how are we actually programming Crozier right now? We have a very typical 4-day-a-week block. It's the first time he's ever pushed 3 days a week of bench press, which I think was cool. Seems to be something to do with obviously natural progression of the sport of powerlifting, but this idea that we can have higher frequencies, and we probably didn't discuss this today, but that is really only commonplace for like the PA, IPF sort of affiliations of the sport of powerlifting. The other world, it's still not a very big thing. I know like Sebastian Oreb pushes 1 squat and 1 deadlift every fortnight pretty much. Obviously they're big guys with a lot more load and a lot more stress on those sessions, but like imagine having somebody who only squats hard once every 2 weeks. Like that's obviously it's a stark contrast to a lot of people that do 3-4 days a week of squatting in our side of the world. So there's something that he wanted to play around with, pushing his bench frequency up, and it's something that has worked very well. He's just hit 200 for a triple at an RPE 9 2 weeks in a row. He wanted to take 205, but it didn't look like it was going to be there. But that was a big PR. Hopefully we can get him into the 220s when we start hitting some singles. With his squatting volume, it's very, very low right now. He's up to 124 kilograms. 122 kilograms, which is about 10 to 11% higher than where he normally sits. He's going up a weight class.
Big cheech.
And as a result, his hips and his knee are struggling to just tolerate the extra load. His also sleep has taken a bit of a hit, so he's just recovery in general has taken a small hit. So his squat volume is very low. We actually only do 3 sets per week, believe it or not. And then his deadlift volume, we are running 5 sets. We're in the 4s at the moment, 5 sets of 4, top set of 4 with 4x4 back off. And he's programmed to hit 345 this week for a set of 4, which will be a massive PR. He pulled 330 last week for that top set, and it flew. And this week he's doing 345. So the overriding principles are the exact same for somebody of that caliber. The biggest variable that we're constantly playing with is how is your athlete recovering? And with somebody like that, who's very good at their sport, they might actually not need that much training, particularly because he is getting bigger and he is getting stronger just by nature of moving up a weight class. But as a whole, again, the principles are the same. We have our comp at the 2nd week of November, which will be interesting. It'll be tough to manage that last 5 weeks being in a holiday phase of moving around aeroplanes and different beds and all that sort of stuff. He's worried that he's going to lose a decent amount of weight as well.
Just got to get sludge.
Camelback sludge.
Camelback.
Just mass gainers. I've told him mass gainers.
Mass gainer in the camel pack when you're walking around.
Constant.
sipping it in.
Constant calories. But yeah, the principles are all the same. They're governed by everybody. It's all the same shit. You just got to manage the recovery and push volume and intensity across your training blocks, and you'll probably get to where you want to be. Powerlifting isn't that difficult.
Don't need to reinvent the wheel.
No.
This thing keeps catching.
We're done.
We're done for today. We will see you.
Who we got next week? Dave
Brigaglio's.
Berguglio.
Brigaglio.
Mr. Bench here at Melbourne Strength Culture. He's also a doctor of geophysics, so he'll have some interesting topics to talk about.
So we'll see you in a fortnight's time.